Serious? People who lost a lawsuit. What happened? Got involved in a 5-car pileup that the police ruled was the fault of the first car. I was fourth and everyone went on their way. A year later I'm sued for health issues by car 3 for rear-ending them. I go to court and show how the officers ruled it, but because they didn't put sole fault, up to 33% of the fault could be applied to another vehicle. A lawyer asked for that to be waived and me to be held 100% at fault and treated like a solo accident. Thankfully the judge did not allow that and I was assigned 33% of health costs. I waited and waited for years but never saw anything until I got a Facebook message from them 7 years later saying I owed them money. I told them it had probably been too long and to have their lawyer contact me and never heard anything. I would have told them to eat 33% of my dong. This lady that lives about 2 minutes away from us hit us at about 5 miles per hour in her big truck at a stop sign. She wasn't paying attention when she started to go and turned into the backside of our car. Normal apologies from her and admission of guilt while there, only later to find out she is blaming us and claiming injuries. Injuries at 5 freaking mph in your big butt truck and our little car. She proceeded to sue us since she has a relative as her attorney. Dragged on for a year with insurance companies fighting representing us. Finally ended and she won some money from insurance. Was settled before it went over our limit and had to pay out of pocket. Terrible human being. Buddy asked me late one Sunday if I wanted to smoke. I declined but tagged along because I was bored and I took the semester off and it was my 19th birthday next week. Decided to go to Dunkin' Donuts after him and another buddy burned. He asked if I could drive because they were high and I decided to be designated driver, doing the responsible thing you know. Dunkin' was full of cop cars. They got paranoid and wanted me to drive to another one. So, this other Dunkin' is close to the other guy's house and they ask me to drop the guy off. Sure, why not? Drop person off. On the return trip home I'm driving home and wake up in a hospital. 6 fractures in pelvis, fractured skull, fractured clavicle, fractured rib, diaphragm ruptured, stomach herniated next to my heart, spleen herniated. Got T-boned by someone at a flashing light. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I got sued by both the person who hit me and who I was driving. They, and the worst part is that this includes my family, accused me of being under the influence, even though my toxicology report that took 6 months said negative. The detective took a vacation and kept extending it every month. No one else had their blood drawn. I couldn't walk for 3 months, was sued and lost, but I still have my right leg, baby, woo. This makes me physically angry. My parents were terrible tenants. They moved into a rental, tore up carpeting and asked landlady to replace it, painted walls, took out dying trees, didn't report broken dishwasher, which ended up causing a massive leak in the kitchen resulting in a total remodel, attempted and failed to fix automatic garage door multiple times resulting in a replacement. I could go on but you get the idea. The landlady was renting out the house for her father. It was the first place she ever rented out and she even in court admitted she was in over her head and let my parents walk all over her. My parents sued the landlady for getting 95% of their deposit, which was $3,000, back 1 week late. According to my parents that action entitled them to the full deposits in addition to $10,000. My parents also sued for stupid things like the landlady lying to them about fixing things in the house and never showing up, resulting in my mother's increased anxiety, so pain and suffering payout. My parents lost the suit, had to pay back the deposit, and fined an additional $5,000 for damages to the house. I was on the landlady's side. I didn't testify against them but I never showed any kind of support for what they were doing. My relationship with them has always been strained, but I have lived away from them for a decade now. I keep my distance for the most part. My parents are not addicts of any kind. They are extremely entitled people who treated a rental like they owned it. They honestly thought what they were doing to the house would help the landlady. This was only one of 2 places they rented before buying again. Anytime my husband and I tried to reason with them they just wouldn't understand any point of view but their own. There were many facepums over the 5 years they stayed in that house. BTW the landlady decided to use a property management company and they were the ones who told my parents to move out. Month-to-month lease after the initial 2-year agreement. She shouldn't have to deal with people like my parents again. Whoa, your parents were our jerks. I got in a small accident in a parking lot. The kind where each of our front bumpers were a bit crunched. I'm not sure whose fault it was, but it was very minor, so I mistakenly admitted fault. She got out of her car and told me it was her fourth accident in as many weeks. She pointed out some trunk damage to me. The cops were called and statements taken. She was pretty belligerent, but I thought it went away. Really minor insurance claim. Literally a week before the statute of limitations for a lawsuit. 2 years my mom across the country gets served. I'd married, moved and changed my last name. The other person was claiming I did it on purpose and filed punitive damages. I was racing my SUV with the radio blaring just as fast as I can now, or whatever the actual Beach Boys lyrics are. She was claiming injury to every joint in her body and 2 years lost wages. I was assigned a lawyer who got the punitive damages removed from the lawsuit, but told me her accident history could actually hurt my case. If I aggravated previous injuries, then I'm liable. After a while I stopped hearing from my lawyer, so I called. After a few minutes of run around from the office about why I'm calling, I'm told my lawyer was hit by a drunk driver and killed. My insurance settled the lawsuit rather than bring in a new lawyer. It still makes me sad thinking about it. Once didn't pay for an adult ticket at the train station. Was caught by the ticket guy and they gave me a £75 fine. Being stupid 18-year-old me, I refused to pay it and ended up being sued for almost £3,000. Not my proudest moment. Sued my old landlady for never giving us a security deposit. Never even returned correspondence about it. 1. Put a hold on her savings. Finally she comes to court to appeal after so much ignoring Rumi and I. And we lose because I sued her instead of her LLC. Sue the fricking LLC people. So my family bought a piece of land. But in the middle of the transaction the seller vanished completely. Because of this the land entered some sort of bureaucratic limbo. After 6 years of incompetence from our lawyer, the judge ruled against us and the land belongs to no one as of now. We're running for a retrial at the moment. My husband's ex used his information to get credit cards. He had no idea until years later after we had been married he was served. Judge found him guilty because during the relationship he willingly gave his ex's personal information. 80k slammed on his credit. Due to the state of limitations he was told he cannot file against her for taking his personal information. I hope she enjoyed all those clothes. My now ex-wife was sued by a man whose car she ran into with a rental car. Her explanation was that he was in butthole and she needed to turn soon, so she moved him out of her lane. We ended up paying for that. She couldn't have possibly used that as the official explanation. I sued National Life Group and lost. They offered a whole life insurance policy where $100/mo went to the policy and a select amount that would be invested in the S&P 500 market, which I chose as $300. Both the policy and the contributions to the market would build cash value. The agent I agreed payment with, not signed documents, important later, claimed the $300 is an investment which I assumed would give me the freedom to withdraw whenever I wished. This was not the case, as the policy, which was not provided to me at the time when I agreed to the payment. Utmost stupidity on my part, I know, actually calls this a strategy and strictly not an investment. They also failed to mention the fact that this policy has a giant penalty should you choose to cancel in the first 10 years. After about a year, I received a statement that showed I paid almost $1,000 in fees, after only paying $4,800 in a year, which I found to be ridiculous. When I requested to cancel the policy, I was told of the $5,500 cash value I had at the time, over $4,000 would be surrendered per the policy. This is the first time I've heard of that, but they claimed they had a document with my signature stating I've received and read the policy that explicitly states this. So I requested both the policy and the document, and when I received them, it turns out the policy does in fact state all of the above, that the money contributed to the S&P 500 market was not an investment, and that the policy has a severe cash surrender if cancelled early. However, the document they had on file with my signature was forged. I've never seen the policy until then. I brought this up with their compliance department and they refused to do anything about it, so I sued in small claims. The company hired a lawyer while I represented myself since I thought there's no way I could possibly lose as I had evidence my signature was forged. The date written on the document was when I was in another state and I had bank statements showing transactions in that state on that very day as well as days before and after, and a copy of my actual signature that I sent to the compliance department which was clearly different from the one on the document. The judge threw out the case because it's written in the policy and I had agreed to the payment. She didn't even bother considering the fact that my signature was forged. Should have just hired a lawyer. General rule of thumb: if the other side has a lawyer, you need a lawyer. My dog and I got attacked by a pit bull in high school. The guy left his gate open and the dog had gotten out as I was walking mine. My dog had her eye punctured out and wounds all over her body while I had my right ear and chunks of my head ripped off with bite marks all over my body. A lawyer took our case instantly thinking he could make lots of money from it but later dropped our case because the man who owned the dog didn't have renter's insurance on his home where he was staying. The lawyer apologized but gave us the information he acquired and apparently his homeowners had no idea of the pit bull and his wife knew the dog was violent but still proceeded to run a daycare out of her home. We had vet bills and medical bills to pay but coming from a severely low income family we couldn't pay them and went to small claims court to try to get something from the guy. The guy never showed up and we won our settlement of a little over I believe $15,000 and that was enough to cover the bills plus extra for pain and suffering. Couple weeks later the guy filed bankruptcy so we never got our payments. He had taken a lower paying job so he would qualify and he hired a $2,000 or higher bankruptcy lawyer. So basically I never got paid, I lost my hearing, and I have to watch my dog cry and shake in her sleep because she's still traumatized and I still shake in my sleep as well. I got into a car accident several years ago. I'll need to give a bit of backstory first. The first floor of my apartment was a Chinese restaurant and when I had left, there was an ambulance parked out front in the street with the guys eating their food. Knowing they would probably still be there when I left to help a friend, I decided to come back on the opposite lane so that way I wouldn't have to blindly duck out in front of oncoming traffic to get back into the parking lot. In the middle of this pouring down rain, I sit still at my spot for several seconds, trying to see if anyone was coming. But the dang ambulance was just so big. After I saw cars coming up behind me, I just shrugged and started going. Suddenly a black SUV comes swerving around the ambulance and strikes me in the back right quarter of the car, totaling both cars. Well, fast forward a few months, I've got a new car and everything is going fine. But then my insurance increased to over twice the price it had been. I called to ask what was up and was told that the court, I didn't even know things had gone to court, had decided that I was the one at fault for the accident. I was displeased, and so I asked for further information on what happened. The woman on the phone pulled up the file and said there was a lot of back and forth, but the final notes from the judge states despite photographic evidence provided by both parties that attest to the presence of the ambulance, there is no reason for an ambulance to have been parked on a main street when not responding to an emergency. Therefore this court will assume that there was no ambulance. With this established, it is clear that Maison Dell did not wait for the road to be cleared and thus instigated the crash. Case closed. Well man, that really sucks. So basically, the judge decided that the ambulance never existed and that the photographs were somehow in error. So now I've got 3 points on my license. And Massachusetts being Massachusetts, that means those points are on my license for 5 freaking years, more than any other state in the country. And guess what? There's an agreement between 45 states or so that say that they will honor the points awarded in a state for as long as that state would have. There's absolutely no way that nothing can be done against that judge. It's ridiculous. Definitely some political crap going on there. I bought a new car with slightly defect electronics. I let the dealer repair it 5 times. They said if they tested it was all good. It only drove between my house and the dealer. I sued them and the judge wanted an official expert to take a look. The expert said the car is undrivable, therefore untestable, and has some used down dirty parts. The case got ceased because of the expert and I had to pay €100 because my insurance is a co-insurance. I also can't re-engage it because the value of the unit is lower than a necessary amount given by law. The dealer did not need to justify. German law. wife took a tenant to court for non-payment. We had already given her multiple copies of rental suitability certificates. House was always in compliance. In our city you can't collect rent without these certificates. She claimed to have never seen the certificates and her signature on them wasn't hers and the judge ruled in her favor. So we had to take $5K off her ledger and she has 3 months rent free to vacate. Infuriating. So, a few years back we hired this old friend of the family as a nanny to my kids. She did that for my sister before, and her sister was working for my mom at the time, so it was fine. Everything was kind of informal, so we never even bothered with a formal contract or signing her hours or anything. We also loaned her close to our $5,000 throughout the time. So, one day she left and sued us for not paying her overtime for working late hours and weekends. The thing is, she worked until 8-9 PM every day because she got home at around 11 or 11:30, and weekends were a compensation for days he missed, which were a lot. But the dumb thing about work laws in Brazil is that she doesn't need to present any proof that she worked those hours. We as the employer need to prove that she didn't. We ended up having to settle, lawyer to lawyer, at around $5,000, and we obviously never got back the money she owed us. So, you know, frick that bee. I hope she takes that dang money and rots in heck for all I care. Her sister got fired a bit later and I hope I never see anyone in that fricking family ever again in my life. Sorry, had to vent a bit there. $5,000. Save other readers the Google. 5,000 Brazilian real equals $1,590.18 US. Paralegal here. Our clients refused settlements, despite our advice, and demanded to go to court for more money damages. Ultimately that was their downfall. This has happened more than once. Not with the same client, just similar situations. Story of my life. Client, I wanna roll the dice at court. Lawyer, you don't understand, you're gonna lose. Client, I wanna go to court. Lawyer, Matherfu, okay fine, let's go to court. Me, paralegal, Fasipum. I won mine, but I'm posting here because even though I won I ultimately lost anyway. A guy intentionally rammed into my car and was charged with a hit and run. This happened in another county from where I lived, so I don't know if it was the notary there or the USPS, but the letter with the information I needed to file a claim for damages at the hearing arrived after the hearing was scheduled. I called and was told I had to sue if I wanted to get anything out of it, so I did. I had to drive almost 2 hours each way to get to the courthouse to file paperwork and then ended up having to chase this guy around since he moved multiple times during the ordeal. Eventually I had good timing and the sheriff went to inventory the property he was living at, but his girlfriend didn't let them in. At this point I exhausted everything I could do myself and hired a lawyer in that area. The lawyer listened to everything and said it wouldn't be a problem to file the correct paperwork for a break and enter by the sheriff so that they can inventory and proceed with the sheriff's sale. By this time the guy decided to call me to try to work something out and then never follow through or return my calls after. He called the lawyer at one point to try to settle who called me about it. I told him to just get whatever he could, but again the guy didn't return any calls. Sheriff sale never happens because guy files for bankruptcy. The shittiest part of all of this is that I was never guaranteed to get anything because my state won't garnish wages or anything like that, and no one bothered to tell me. Overall I wasted a couple $1,000s and didn't get crap for it. I lost passport and after getting new one, unknowingly didn't pay fine for losing old passport, €3. After 2 months got court order for €60 in fine. Landlord didn't give me back my deposit, sued them in small claims. I feel like the judge was against me the whole time, kept saying I was lying. Then I'd show my evidence, then she'd say oh well, I guess that's reasonable, then right back to assuming I'm lying. Meanwhile the landlord never showed any evidence whatsoever, but she took them at their word, and I didn't have evidence that they were lying since I can't prove a negative. I think the worst was when she outright said their word carries more worth because they have a lawyer. WTF, that's not how it's supposed to work. The landlord said he'd return my deposit. Lawyer said that's my word against theirs. They never actually refuted it until I showed the email where they said it. Then the judge said well now they have a lawyer who says they don't have to send it, like, rule on whether they have to or not. not what their lawyer says. Anyway, I didn't straight up lose. The judge recommended we settle for half the deposit because who knows what really happened, and strongly indicated it wouldn't go my way if we didn't settle. So I agreed to it, and they just wanted to be done with it, so they agreed to it. Still that I feel like I wasn't given a fair voice just because I didn't bring a lawyer. To small claims. Oh, this management company had also been in the news repeatedly for being slumlords. Is there some way you can report the judge, because it sounds an awful lot like she's biased in favor of the management company. My ex sued me for sole custody of our son. He didn't want him and had told me that. His parents wanted my son, so they paid for the attorney. I lost physical custody but won joint custody. Whoa, I am so sorry to hear that. I hope you and your son are doing well under the circumstances. Hug. My father sued the city we live in because the trees the city planted on our street, before he was even born, had massive roots and were cracking the concrete of his driveway. His reasoning was that if the city had to pay to maintain the trees, they should also have to pay to maintain any damage their roots did to his driveway. The judge didn't see it that way. A couple years ago our basement flooded, and it caused a massive amount of damage. We had a company come in and help pack stuff up while also dealing with the damage. The thing is, they get paid by the box. So they were putting a few items in a box and then closing it up, leaving a ton of open space in every box. So we had to shell out way more money than we would have had to had they actually packed the boxes correctly. We took them to court and lost. So that's fun. Don't ask about details because it was my parents handling all of this stuff and not me. Similar with my moving. I made sure the moving company was insured for damaged goods. Well, they moved everything and damaged a filing cabinet and dropped my 50 inches TV. Turns out they're insured by the pound. I got $35 for the 1-year-old TV because it weighs way less than it's worth. Read your contracts. My parents rented out a house about 15 years ago or so. A lady who rented it was there with her kids, and they managed to trash the house completely. The damage was ridiculous. She then went months without paying rent, and we couldn't get her out of the house. Lawyers were brought in, lawsuits filed. Our lawyer turned out to be incredibly incompetent, and the best she could get from my parents was to get the tenant out of the house without having to pay for the damages and the missed rent. It was such an awful situation and it really weighed heavily on my parents for a while. I couldn't believe how incredibly slanted the courts were to tenants over landlords. This lady was so awful and malicious, and she got off scot-free. Still makes me angry. TLDR. Essentially freeloaded for 18 months due to a misunderstanding. Got sued and lost case. Paying $3,000 in back rent. Still got a deal. Learned to get everything in writing. Details. Nothing major, but I was living with my BF at the time, where he was renting a room for $500. As I originally understood it, I was okay to move in as I wasn't taking up additional space. I just covered under the $500 rent my BF paid. Eventually, the landlord said I needed to start paying $300 rent for myself, in addition to my BF's part. For $800, we could easily rent an entire apartment, so the landlord never mentioned anything about the additional rent for about a year. Eventually he kicked me and my BF out for freeloading and took me to court. When explaining the scenario, the judge saw me as living rent-free and had me pay the maximum amount of $3,000 for the almost year and a half living at that location. Upside, I still got a deal on rent as it would equal to about $166 a month for 18 months. Landlord learned his lesson to sign a lease agreement with tenant and I learned to get everything in writing. At 18 I put my name on a straight truck title for my ex-boyfriend. This was 9 years ago. The truck was used for speakers for his music production for the raves parties he used to participate in. The truck broke down at some yard after a festival and was abandoned. We started to receive letter after X time goes by, and stupid me ignored the letters. The breakup was happening at this time. I get a letter to go to court for $5k worth of fees etc. etc. I go to court, look like a dumb naive child that I was in front of the judge, trying to explain my situation. I lose. I ended up calling the other party and made a deal to pay $2,500 in cash and the other party rolled the lawsuit altogether. I had to get money from my parents cause my ex was broke as a joke and had a felony so he couldn't ever get a stable job. Plus his drug dealings and parties were not earning him any money. Of course his drug dealings was earning him money. That's why people deal drugs. He just didn't want to pay his debt with that money. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.